Welcome to the Tour de France podcast with humansinvent.com and Sharp. I'm Richard Moore, the author of Tour de France 100 and Sky's the Limit, and I'm joined by Daniel Friebe, author of Mountain High and The Cannibal, a biography of Eddy Merckx, and Lionel Birnie, co-editor of the Cycling Anthology. We will all be covering the Tour de France, which starts on Corsica on June the 29th, and as we travel around the country in pursuit of the world's biggest bike race, we will be recording a daily podcast exclusively for humansinvent.com. In this preview edition, just over a week before the tour starts, we'll discuss Bradley Wiggins and Chris Froome, the soap opera that has dominated the build-up to the tour. We'll get that out of the way. Our picks for the podium, then we'll look at some of the other runners and riders, and then finally we're going to have a good look at the route for this year's tour. Here we are looking forward to the 100th tour, and where better to do so than in the middle of Hyde Park in London. So apologies for the breeze in the background, maybe the odd whirring of a Boris bike going past, but I'm here with Lionel. Hello, Lionel.
Hello, Richard.
And Daniel.
Hello, Richard.
I said we would discuss first the soap opera of the Wiggins-Froome, what shall we call it, debacle, shenanigans, Froome and Wiggins gate.
Cold War.
This has been, I suppose, rumbling on since last year's tour, and of course, a couple of weeks ago now, it was confirmed that Bradley Wiggins will not be defending his title. This was announced quite a long way out from the start of the tour. He has a knee injury, but the team has admitted it's a minor knee injury. I've been told that had he had this knee injury last year, there's no way at all it would have stopped him riding. So there's a little bit more to it than the official press release, we think.
And like you said, Rich, 6 weeks before the tour it was announced. That's a very long time. I mean, off the top of my head, I can remember in the last 10, 15 years, guys who have had supposedly had knee injuries and taken it up to 2 weeks before the tour, or a week before
last
the tour.
Year.
Exactly. To make their decision. So it's either very, very circumspect on Sky's part, or it's slightly odd.
It makes life a lot easier for Sky, though, doesn't it? It's avoided the soap opera dragging on right the way up to the start and into the first week, and then we would be, as journalists, looking forward to analysing every little moment, every utterance, every body language signal that we could to discover who is the true leader, because it doesn't really matter. It didn't really matter what Dave Brailsford said about who the leader is or who's working for who. The questions would carry on deep into the tour until the race itself actually decided, and I think it's a shame we've been denied that.
We've been denied that intrigue. Well, I mean, it's worth remembering that Dave Brailsford said right from the start of the year that whatever happened, they were both professionals and they would do the job required of them, whoever ended up being leader. I suppose there are two things. One is, it is a pity that the tour doesn't have its defending champion when we think that he probably could be riding. It's a shame that the defending champion doesn't get the opportunity to pin on number one and to actually put in the defence of his title. And the other thing is that Bradley Wiggins is one of Sky's strongest riders. There's no question of that at all. He could do a job at the tour. I think we can only imagine that he is not prepared. Either he's not prepared to do a job, or they're not confident that he will do the job required of him, because I don't think we can argue either with the fact that we'll go on to talk about Chris Froome's status as favourite, but the way things have gone this year, you'd be silly also to make Wiggins the team leader ahead of Froome at this stage.
Well, yeah, but you go back to last year's tour and the job that Chris Froome did, even though he clearly felt that he could have been a bigger factor in the race for the yellow jersey. He had to be reined in by Dave Brailsford and by Sky. And on the rest day in Pau last year, Brailsford said that he had pretty much sat down with Froome and said, "You're in a great position here to observe Bradley Wiggins and see all of the stuff that's going on around the yellow jersey, what it requires to win the Tour de France, and to store that away and call on that experience when he got into the position to be the team leader." And last year, Froome probably felt that he could have done more for himself, and maybe even thought that there's no guarantee then that his chance would come. But clearly, the way he started this year, his chance is here. This is it. The here and now for him. He's won all bar one, I think, of the stage races that he's taken part in so far. His results have been, he really has plotted his way to the Tour in almost identical fashion to Bradley's
meticulous, yeah,
season last year.
Daniel?
I think they'll miss. You talked about them missing Wiggins. They'll certainly miss him in the team time trial. When he's committed, I think there are very few riders in the world that are more valuable in a team time trial type scenario. But I think we all suggested that this might happen. That I think I wrote a preview for a magazine a few months ago, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who said something to this effect. I thought that Wiggins would find a way to miss the Tour, and I thought the Giro gave him the perfect alibi. However that turned out, and as it didn't turn out too well, and the alibi that it gave him was that he was injured and not prepared physically.
I'm sure the truth will come out at some point. The question is it Bradley Wiggins using that alibi, or is it the team using it on his behalf?
I mean, I think between us, we always said that Wiggins' character is such that he was always likely to react perhaps passively aggressively to a conflict, in the sense that he was always more likely than Froome to say, right, that's it, you have your way, I won't do it. Whereas we always thought that Froome would be slightly maybe steelier in a way and say, right, if you want to contend this on the road and decide who's the strongest guy on the road, that's what we'll do, and I'll show that I'm worthy of the leadership role.
It is like Froome has won the first battle. There is this paradox, really, where Froome comes across as this very polite, diffident guy, but as you say, there is a steeliness to him, and Wiggins is the bigger personality, you would have thought, and yet he is the one who has lost this initial battle, and who perhaps isn't as steely or hard. I mean, we certainly heard at last year's Tour that he was on the verge of going home, apparently, the night in the Alps where Froome had attacked. So rattled was he by that he was actually prepared, apparently, to pack it in and go home. Now, that shows that is a remarkable kind of overreaction to that relatively minor conflict. So you can imagine how he's responded to a bigger battle for team leadership.
Well, as they say, beware of the quiet man. I mean, Froome is not demonstrative in his ambition, but it is clearly there. It's, he is incredibly ambitious, but he wears that ambition with a smile and a friendly manner. But you can't deny the fact that this year he has set out to make himself the Sky team leader for the Tour, and to put all of the debate to bed. And he's done that by winning bike races, and he's gone, pretty much. He's swung from every rope, one from the other, without missing a beat. He's plotting his way to the Tour in pretty much perfect form.
Sorry, Daniel.
Also, Rich, I would say that what's happened this year has shed a new and interesting light on the Tour last year. That Wiggins last year was in this perfect groove, and we came to a point where it was almost taken for granted that he was going to win the Tour. But actually, it was a very fragile equilibrium that we didn't really appreciate at the time. That everything was going perfectly for him, and he was in the second wheel over every mountain, and no one really kind of attacked and tried to sort of destabilise him. And I remember last year we were there
apart from Chris Froome.
Well, exactly, and Bourgogne. I remember, I think Bellegarde, the stage over the Grand Colombier, and we were there, and that was only a week into the Tour, and we were talking to Nibali, and I remember a conversation with Basso where he was sort of saying that it's impossible to attack, there was nothing we can do. And actually, you look back now and you think, well, if people had just tried to kind of upset that equilibrium and get him and kind of derail him from, he was almost railroaded towards winning the Tour, that they, it could all have blown up in his face, and it almost did. All it took was that, those couple of little digs by Chris Froome.
He's fragile, isn't he? He is very fragile, and this does fit a pattern of his career where he is either on it or off it. It's one extreme or the other, and we've seen, even going back, reading recently about 2002, and he had a bit of a crisis after the Commonwealth Games, and he was called into a meeting, and he dressed up in a suit and everything to try and dress to impress, and that was the first time he kind of, won a second chance, and his career has been all about kind of earning second chances after Athens as well, after 2010. He's had these crises, hasn't he, all the way through.
Yeah.
It does fit a pattern.
It does, but you also have to accept that having won the Tour de France, he doesn't really have to prove very much.
No, and the problem is at 33, you're running out of second chances to come back, And also, I always felt that hunger wasn't there for the Giro in the same way as it was for the Tour. I think he wanted it to be there, but just not convinced
He was
that it was
hedging his
there.
bets slightly, wasn't he? You know, he had one eye on the Tour as well.
I guess the other question is whether, as is rumoured, Froome played a part in the team selection by, putting pressure on the team not to pick Wiggins for the team, that he might have imagined that he would become a disruptive influence in the team.
Well, it's possible, but from the point that Dave Brailsford publicly made Chris Froome his leader, which was it had been strongly hinted at the end of last year, but then when he moved to actually come out at the start of May and say Chris Froome is the leader for the Tour de France and to try and put the whole issue to bed, it would make sense from that point on, if you're going to back your horse that publicly, that you would do everything you can to give the guy the best possible chance. And if they decide that over the 3 weeks Bradley Wiggins wouldn't necessarily offer the same support as another rider, then it makes sense to pick the strongest team to give Chris Froome the chance to win the race.
Right, we'll probably put that one to bed ourselves now, tuck it in and probably get it out at some point during the Tour, I'm sure, especially if something happens in the first few, like last year, Chris Froome lost a minute and a half on the first stage. They are putting all their eggs in the basket marked Froome at the moment, so if something happens in the first week, we may have cause to wonder again what Bradley Wiggins might have done had he been there. As it is, I think he's training in Mallorca at the moment and training quite hard, and it is slightly odd that the Tour will be starting without the defending champion. Daniel, sorry, were you going to add something there?
Can they bring one as a sub though? Are they allowed?
I don't think that's allowed, actually. No. We'll get more familiar with the rules and stuff as we go on. Actually.
You're listening to the Tour de France podcast with humansinvent.com and Sharp.
Now we're going to make ourselves hostages to fortune by picking a podium. Lionel, what would be your tip for the top three?
Well, I think Chris Froome is going to win the Tour de France. I think he's going to.
Very bold assertion.
I don't think anyone else would be so bold as to nail their colours so firmly to the mast. But I think Chris Froome
he's
is
odds on actually with the bookies.
Well, I think that's probably because everybody's been
jumping on
and putting money on him. But I think Alberto Contador will be the runner-up, and I think TJ Van Garderen will take third place on the podium, because I think he's built everything towards the Tour de France this year, and I think he'll ride into that position pretty quietly. I don't think he'll do too much to. He can get right up there in the time trial on the coast there to Mont Saint-Michel, and then
do you not see a similar situation brewing there as was brewing at Sky with Froome? And I almost think it's if you wind the clock back, with Cadel Evans, if you wind the clock back 12 months, you've got a young and ambitious, very talented, sort of on the cards, on paper deputy leader, and then quite a fragile, volatile leader in Cadel Evans. I don't know, perhaps the balance of power is slightly different. I see Van Garderen in the ascendant more than Froome was last year, but
until the Giro, and Cadel Evans rode brilliantly in that Giro, and again he didn't really put a foot wrong, but I think he's going to find it hard, I would imagine, particularly that last week in the Alps, where it's just hard day after hard day.
To back up.
To back that up, and I think he'll unravel a bit, and Van Garderen will just be more consistent, as simple as that. I think he may well edge ahead.
I think there will be a handing over of the baton at some point, but as Daniel says, the character of Cadel Evans makes that potentially quite interesting and potentially dynamite, because he definitely still sees himself as a team leader.
Also, the way Cadel rides, Cadel is very, he always wants to be at the front. He's desperate to be right at the front. He's always quite kind of authoritarian with his teammates, I think, as far as that is concerned. And, it's how those two gel. I'm not sure, whether Van Garderen has the same take on how to lead a team. And it's whether any friction that might develop will destabilise them, because I think it's a lot of years since Cadel Evans has been in a Grand Tour team and not been the leader.
But last year there was a little bit of a challenge from Van Garderen that became that in the last week it was clear that he was the stronger of the two.
Yeah.
I think that Van Garderen, just by just by dint of the fact that he will be more consistent, and he will probably do a better ride in the time trial. He'll be ahead of Cadell, and then there won't be any debate about waiting for Evans. I think, whereas last year there was that kind of half a day where they just didn't know who the leader was. I think this time they really will be right, every man for themselves, and
it's a bit like the Indurain Delgado handover in a way. In 1990 it was obvious that Indurain was stronger than Delgado, but with the difference being that Cadell Evans is not Pedro Delgado and TJ Van Garderen is not Miguel Indurain.
No.
Profound insight there.
I mean, in terms of massively, but I think it's almost a watershed moment for that team, BMC, because they're going to go in with huge names, huge reputations. They're going to go in with probably Hushovd and Gilbert as well. And it's just going to be interesting to how that shakes out, because I think we're all in agreement that that team's invested a massive amount of money and the results have really not been up to scratch thus far. And they brought in Alan Piper this year. People thought there'd be a big change of mentality, a big change of in terms of output as well, productivity. And from what I understand, talking to people, that a lot of changes are kind of taking place in progress, but we haven't yet seen the tangible results, I would say, and they're certainly not carrying all before them yet. So I think it's an interesting tour for that team.
Daniel, what about your pick for the podium?
I think Froome, Contador and Port.
Richie Port.
Yeah, there'll be groans, I'm sure, from the anti-Sky lobby, if there is such a thing. No, but I think the team will be very, very important. I think there are certain stages where I think Sky are really going to ride very aggressively. I think the stage to Bagnes to Bigorre, it's Bagnes de Bigorre, isn't it, this year? Yep. And Le Grand Bornand in the Alps. So Bagnes de Bigorre in the Pyrenees, Grand Bornand in the Alps. They're the two big mountain stages with multiple cols, and I think that's where they will try to really ride very aggressively, almost from the start of stages, and blow everyone away. And I think that Froome will be holding on to Port's coattails, and those two stages will be key, really.
I mean, it's very tempting to go with that, Sky getting two men on the podium again, but it's going to be a very different kind of tour, I think, to last year, where Bradley Wiggins he wasn't carried along, but it was very controlled, and I don't think Froome is going to ride it in the same sort of way, and so it's difficult. Also, last year, as you said, Daniel, nobody really attacked them, nobody really took them on. No. If that happens this year, somebody like Port might be used up a bit earlier. Last year, Froome, although it's said that he rode in support of Bradley Wiggins last year, the truth is he didn't actually have to. He didn't really need to do very much to help Bradley Wiggins last year.
I mean, it was interesting, Port saying, I also want to, finish, what did he say? I want to finish on the podium, I would like to finish second. I mean, we know that those two are good friends, Port and Froome, but if that had come from Froome and Wiggins had been riding, or vice versa, that would have been seen as a declaration of war. I mean, it's quite a big statement to make. I remember, I think it's in the Tyler Hamilton book, isn't it, where he talks about an interview he gave to Velo News before the tour, and a much more innocuous statement than that. He said, I'll look to get in some breaks, and Armstrong was straight on the phone saying, what the hell are you talking about?
That was funny, it's interesting. I mean, there are a lot of assumptions being made. We were at a lunch last week, and there was a sort of talk of this second British victory, as though it was a fait accompli almost. There are a lot of assumptions being made. I think because, again, last year's tour was really quite easy in the end. There are a lot of assumptions that I think this year's will be the same, and I'm not sure that it will be.
I think the thing about last year's tour, as we were saying earlier, is that they weren't really challenged. Nobody seized the opportunity to upset the Sky train, really, and they were, as you say, they didn't use up all they didn't burn through all their matches in the mountains. They still had fresh legs to, Froome was in a position where he was able to put the cat among the pigeons on a couple of occasions. And this year, the start is a lot more tricky. It's going to require, it's certainly going to be a lot more nerve-wracking for a team like Sky that want to control and want to make sure that everything goes perfectly to plan. I mean, a puncture on Corsica at the wrong moment could could completely change the course of the
Well,
Tour
we're going
de
to talk
France.
about Corsica in a minute, Lionel.
We are,
Don't,
but I think
don't spoil it.
But Sky's plan will be the same as last year. They'll get to the Pyrenees, and that first stage where they will try to set it up. It's not dissimilar to La Planche des Belles Filles last year, where it's a relatively short climb, and a lot of damage could be done in 2 kilometres at the end.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Froome and Contador will be looking to try and attack one another. But you know, if that attack starts and Port just follows wheels, there's no, you know, it's not difficult to imagine them both being in the top 3, 4 after the 2 Pyrenean stages, and then the time trial is going to leave them
Could
even
establish
closer to
them
the
as the top 2, as its 2 strongest, which is similar to last year. Yeah.
And then it becomes about the Alps and how much work Port would have to do to defend.
Yeah.
Assuming, of course, that Froome does better than Port in the time trial.
Yeah. So my podium picks, not very original. Well, Froome, Contador, and Andy Schleck.
Oh.
No, I'm only joking. Obviously. Froome, Contador, and I would say Van Garderen, I think, as well. I can see a scenario, having said earlier that it could be difficult for Port to get on the podium, I can see a scenario where he does end up on the podium. We've all picked Contador as for finishing second. I mean, in my case, I think it's based on history more than current form. I think we're all assuming that he's going to be an awful lot better than he was at the Dauphiné, where he was very disappointing indeed. In fact, it's one of the most... He's somebody, you know, right from the start of the year in Oman, he was aggressive and he was good, and Chris Froome won that race, but Contador was good.
That was his best performance of the
year.
year.
Yeah, the Dauphiné is possibly the worst stage race performance of his career, just about.
Well, once it was obvious he couldn't win the race, he then did ride differently. He rode in support of Mick Rogers, and so yeah, if you look at just the classification, definitely. But he was still getting through some good work in that race, which you have to assume he's going to be a factor, particularly in the last week when it's mountain after mountain in the Alps.
Yeah, and bizarrely, he's got one of the strongest teams he's ever had.
Yeah.
You know, with a lot of firepower. Mick Rogers going well, Kreuziger, Chris Anker Sorensen.
Kreuziger, mate.
Kreuziger, mate.
Yeah, it's...
Should we explain that? Let's not explain that.
No, we might, because Matt White's back at Orica now. You never know with Kreuziger, mate. But yeah, Contador's a bit of an unknown quantity. I did mention Andy Schleck in jest there. But what can we expect from Andy Schleck? What is going on with Andy Schleck?
I think it's very dangerous to expect anything from Andy Schleck because there's a large possibility of being disappointed.
Yeah.
Unless you expect nothing.
Yeah.
It's a very strange... This is a guy who finished second in his first Grand Tour, rode well in his second Grand Tour in France, and had one bad day, or he probably would have finished... He could have finished on the podium there as well. And he's finished on the podium in every other Grand Tour he's ridden, I believe. Hasn't he? He finished second at the Tour in 2009, second in 2010, and then was upgraded to winner.
Some Vueltas,
second in the Vuelta, yeah.
They went out
sometimes,
drinking,
sometimes he's not finished the Vuelta. But in a Grand Tour that he's ridden to try and perform in, he's generally never disappointed. And since his crash last year in the Dauphiné...
But it's not, that's the thing. There's a lot of talk about his crash in the Dauphiné, but his performances had really started to get alarmingly.
He'd been having an awful season, yeah.
He'd been ill that year in Paris-Nice in 2011, but 2012, sorry. And also, you know, it was encouraging last week at the Tour of Switzerland, and you know there were people throwing around figures on wattages, on climbs and stuff, and it looked fairly respectable. But I really think that the Tour of Switzerland this year, and it has been for a couple of years, was very much the poor relation compared to the Dauphiné. I mean, you looked at guys who were in the group at the end of climbs, and Matthias Frank, with all due respect, and Maxime Bouet, people like that, and they're not really guys that we expect to be in the top 10 or even 15 in the Tour de France.
Yeah, it's you mentioned wattages on climbs. We'll probably return to that at some future podcast. But yeah, I think I interviewed Andy Schleck quite recently about his stage win in 2011 at the Col de Galibier. It was probably the last great ride that he's done, and it was sort of like reminiscing with a retired rider a little bit. He really enjoyed kind of looking back on that, but you think, well, this guy's still only 28.
Yeah.
But it was as though this ride belonged to that he almost recognised that he wouldn't be capable of a ride like that again. It was quite strange. So yeah, it'd be interesting, and it's strange to see a rider who's been at the front, suffering so badly in the mountains especially.
This is the humansinvent.com Tour de France podcast, powered by Sharp.
It's not all about the yellow jersey, of course. There's other things going on at the Tour. Pick out a few other riders. Mark Cavendish is an obvious one. Great chance this year to take the first yellow jersey of his career on stage 1 in Corsica. Daniel, you're close to Mark, aren't you?
Not at the moment, not physically.
Not physically, but what do you think? I mean, Mark he had a fantastic Giro, obviously, and a couple of defeats last week. Is that just a sort of fatigue from the Giro? Do you think he'll be? He has at Grand Tours sometimes not hit them running. It takes him a few days to get into it.
It's a funny one with that race, the ZLM Tour. So he seems to have settled on this as his preferred final stage race before the Tour. He did it last year as well, and won the GC.
He won GC, but didn't win a stage.
Didn't win a stage, but he talks. If you ask him now about, for instance, his race program is very sort of packed full with high quality races now, and you sometimes say to him, well, what do you not feel like going to smaller races and maybe just stacking up the wins and for instance going for records and just maybe accumulating 35 wins in a year? And he actually says now that he struggles in smaller races and he doesn't really know why. It's something to do with the style of sprinting and some of the other teams and maybe continental teams, professional division teams that take part, and the finishes he finds are more chaotic, and also he senses that his motivation perhaps isn't what it is in the bigger races, and he almost talks a bit about a mental block in smaller races now, and so in that respect it's not really surprising that he was beaten a couple of times last week, but certainly his form in the Giro was outstanding. There was some talk actually among the sprinters in the Giro about they felt that he wasn't at the same level in terms of his raw speed, and they were perhaps closer. I don't know what you guys
what was so
make of that.
impressive about the Giro, I think, was his toughness. It was such a hard race, and just how robust he is. And it's such a key component of being a good rider. I mean, his ability to start and finish Grand Tours in comparison to certain other sprinters in the past is very, very impressive. And the fact that he finished that Giro, I thought, spoke volumes about his robustness.
He's going to have to hit the ground running though in this Tour.
Well, this is a great chance for him, isn't it, to take the yellow?
It's the first real chance for him. Since Prudhomme's not a fan of time bonuses, as we know. So when there's a prologue, his chance of taking the yellow jersey, even if he were to win several sprint stages before the climb start, is dramatically reduced because there's no time bonuses. So he needs. He's got two chances, hasn't he? This year, and I gather next year in Yorkshire. But Yorkshire will be a flat stage on the opening day. But it's unusual for a rider who has won so much
to never have worn the
yellow jersey. And I think Prudhomme is aware. A bit like he was when Cavendish won, a handful of stages but didn't win the green jersey. Prudhomme is aware that the history of the race is enhanced by the big champions of each era wearing the yellow jersey. And at the moment, it sounds like a slightly flippant thing to say, but there's no photograph of Mark Cavendish wearing the yellow jersey, and the Tour will be aware of that would add something to the race. So it would be a popular win, I think, if he were to win the first stage.
I mean, what you just said there, Lionel, about Prudhomme being very aware of riders' place in history and the importance of someone like Mark Cavendish winning the Giro and the yellow jersey at the Giro. That is another reason why I find its stubborn refusal to reintroduce time bonuses Prudhomme slightly baffling. I mean, I think you're hard pressed to find anyone, certainly among journalists, who doesn't think that would be a good idea to bring them back.
It would be a good idea because we've seen a couple of times in recent years where somebody gets into the jersey and basically they're in the jersey until the first mounted stage. Happened with Cancellara twice in 5 years, hasn't it? But they do. It was a bit like the era when they rested the team time trial for a long period of time, and then brought it back, and now they kind of seem to alternate team time trial stage. In recent years, we've had an opening road stage instead of a prologue, but this is the first time for a long decades when the first stage has been designed to end in a
it's the first
potentially in a.
It's the first time since 1966, I think. Since the pro. I mean, Prudhomme really doesn't like the pro, does he? There's a pattern now developing, which is interesting. What else? I mean, what other riders should we be looking out for? Sagan is obviously a threat, and we saw in Switzerland that he can be a threat in the semi-hard mountainous stages as well. But he could be there for the end of stage 1, too. He's a real danger man, I would have thought.
Certainly, but I think the other two stages on course.
They both suit him as well.
Yeah, I think they're difficult to judge those stages.
Yeah.
We were talking before the podcast, which was a French team manager. Which was the?
Don't know who the French team manager was.
But someone told
Prudhomme that they're looking at the first 3 days is really just looking at that as a whole tour, and because there's such critical days and so much could go wrong there.
I mean, looking at the climb profiles, I wouldn't rule out 3 bunch sprints there. I think that's going again. Yeah, because you look at the hardest climb on the last day, or the last climb on the last day in Corsica. So the third stage, it's 3.3 kilometres at 8% roughly. Now, Mark Cavendish has been over much harder climbs than that in the closing stages.
I don't think it's just. We'll come on to the actual route itself. But it's not just about the gradients.
It's about
twisty and turny, and it's going to be in one long line from a long way out.
The race of 1,000 bends, Prudhomme called it. Yeah. We'll go on to the route in a minute, but we'll talk a bit more about Corsica, and we'll probably talk about it again when we're there, I would think. But any other riders that we should be looking out for? Daniel, you were talking a little bit earlier about Thibaut Pinot. Obviously, breakthrough tour for him last year.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how he gets on. I mean, his descending is still absolutely disastrous. The stage in Switzerland last week, it was a sort of a 7k descent of the Albula Pass it was the stage into La Punt, and pretty straightforward descent, and he lost 20 seconds, and he was off the back almost, in the first kilometre of the descent, and he really has to remedy that if he's ever going to be a tour contender.
I think descending is becoming more important. I mean, we saw it at the Giro especially. It's become, and it's crazy that it's been an area that's been sort of neglected, or that it's when the cameras are off and we don't really know. A lot of the time, it's almost as if the race is neutralised on descents. But this is an area that riders who are good on descents could really exploit, I think.
Yeah, I think so, and I think maybe race organisers are becoming more and more sensitive to it. They're more and more aware of the need to provide a canvas for attacking riding, and therefore you finding more climbs, in the last 20 kilometres with a descent into the finish, which is great for the spectator. I think much more interesting than summit finishes often. But yeah, I agree, Rich, and also, we're seeing fewer and fewer long-range attacks when there are summit finishes sort of 7-8 kilometres from the finish. Generally, it's getting harder and harder to make up time, so we're seeing attacks in the last 2 kilometres, last kilometre. So maybe riders see descents as a place where you can pick up almost free time. Physically, it's not as hard to attack, but it's somewhere where you can make up a few seconds.
Any other riders, Lionel, that you'll be looking out for at the tour?
Well, it's not a surprise, but Thomas Voeckler, he always comes up with something.
Yeah.
He will be aggressive as he always is. And I find him really exciting to watch. I know it's a lot of it is he's almost like sort of a pantomime character, isn't he? With the jersey zipped down to the waist and his tongue out, and he's mugging to the cameras. But I think he is an entertaining rider to watch. So whenever he gets into a break, I just like watching the way he picks apart. It doesn't matter who he's in a break with. He manages to sort of pick apart the weaknesses in his other in his breakaway companions. Last year it was Dries de Venins and Michele Scarponi, and I forget who else was in that break. But he plotted that. He plotted that brilliantly, and to me that was one of the highlights of the race, just because it was tactically interesting to watch. It wasn't, it wasn't it was perhaps predictable that he won, but watching the way he won it was what entertained me.
One little dark horse, maybe, assuming he gets picked, is Andrew Talansky. Garmin have got a great record of, I'm not saying that he's a GC contender, but he's an exciting rider who's capable of some, something special, I think, and they've got a good record of producing somebody unexpected.
Yeah, one guy a tour.
I think Garmin will produce somebody for the top 10 without a doubt, but I think it will be Daniel Martin.
Dan Martin is another one, yeah. But I was speaking about him with Sean Kelly last week, actually, and that he was saying that he would encourage him to lose half an hour in the mountains and go for a stage win, and not try and do the Nicholas Roach thing of riding into the top 10.
I think Dan's challenge is that there is this preconception, and it's not just journalists, it's also people within his own team and colleagues, that there is this preconception that he's fragile and inconsistent, and he's liable to have one bad day every 10, and it's whether he wants to take on that challenge of proving people wrong and proving that also to himself, proving that he can do it, proving that he can be consistent. I think the mountains competition is something that will obviously appeal to him, and that's a realistic target.
No English speaking winner since 1984, Robert Miller. I mention that every year.
Here we go. We're not even there yet.
It's a remarkable statistic. It's a remarkable statistic, Jesus. Isn't it?
Yeah, there hasn't been an English-speaking winner of the Tour since 2012.
The Tour de France with humansinvent.com. Innovation, craftsmanship and design.
For our final section of our preview podcast chat, let's select a stage. I was going to talk about Corsica, but we've kind of done that. I think the Tour could be lost by one or two GC contenders in Corsica. But we've kind of talked about those stages, and we'll talk about them again when we get there. But Lionel, can you pick out a stage that particularly interests you?
There's several that particularly interest me, but
going
in sort of chronological order, the stage from Aix-en-Provence to Montpellier quite early on, that's the sort of day that we all will assume will be quite quiet and will end in a bunch sprint and nothing much will happen, and we'll be looking forward to a beer in the Place de la Comédie in Montpellier at the end of the day. But there's a potential for carnage if the wind blows, because that's where,
as it is today in Hyde Park.
It pretty much always blows there, doesn't it? Yeah. It's become a bit of a classic, that stage.
It has, yeah. The 2009 was a really good one, La Grande Motte, wasn't it, where it finished, which is a bit further along the coast, but they had a change of direction, and
HTC
two or three teams. Yeah, it was HTC and Astana, wasn't it?
Because Contador was left behind,
and so was Wiggins as well.
That's right. Yeah.
But HTC exploited the wind to open the gaps to the other sprinters to set up Cavendish for the
As Lance said at the time, you don't win 7 tours by luck. You win them by doping, as we know now. But anyway,
I'm not sure he added that second bit.
No, he didn't at the time. No.
And that Lionel was very similar to the stage. Was it 2007 where Vino split it, and it was almost identical
through the
Como.
Yeah. I think that's when you see
and it's
pure
great to
bike
watch,
racing.
isn't it?
It's
great to
pure
watch.
Bike racing. It's flat or flattish roads, long. You can see where the next bend's coming. You can see the riders that have been dropped. The panic. You can see even from the helicopter shots. Everybody's grovelling to close gaps. The diving into the slipstream of the team cars. Just doing whatever they can to try and recover lost ground. And that's when the Tour can be lost by somebody on a day like that. And you look back at the end and you say, well, so and so lost 50 seconds that day.
Yep.
And it's really easy to say they needlessly lost those seconds. But that's what the race is all about. It's about using the terrain and the conditions to try and forge some kind of advantage.
And I think one of the interesting things about that day as well is that everyone will know, and everyone will be prepared, and they will know exactly where it's going to happen, because I think there's a right-hand bend exactly like there was in that stage we just mentioned to La Grande Motte in 2009, about 30-40 kilometres from the finish. But you can only fit a certain number of riders across the road, and even if you know exactly where it's going to happen, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be in those 30, 40, 50 riders who
it was Mick Rogers
Mick
Rogers who kind of instigated that, I think, in 2009 under orders from the car. But you know, he'll have Contador presumably on his wheel this time.
Yeah.
They'll all be alert to it, I think, but, you know, you can be badly positioned, something might have happened, or, you know, and once, if you're not in the top 20 or 30 riders, you're in a very vulnerable position.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was actually true. It was a great soundbite at the time, and we all sort of had a giggle at it, but when Armstrong said it's not rocket science, and it really isn't, you know, when there is a 90-degree bend in those conditions, then you can be fairly confident. And it is always windy down there, you know, it's the Mistral, and so there's a big chance that something will happen there.
Daniel, is there a stage that you would like to
very intrigued by the double ascent of Alpe d'Huez, whether they're going to go down the Col de Sarenne descent. Tony Martin last week expressed some reservations about it. It's not the only one. As soon as it was unveiled last year, I think Marc Madio was one of the first. He said he remembered going down there in his car, and a lot of riders and team managers will be familiar with this because it is a kind of secret back road off the side of Alpe d'Huez, and Marc Madio said he remembered it being very, very dangerous. And there's another furore that's been created by, I wouldn't say it's an environmentalist group, it's one individual who's a local guy, funnily enough, called, his surname is Stelvio, bizarrely, Matteo Stelvio, and he has been bombarding ASO with letters, and he's been bombarding the local police force with letters for the last few months, and he has an online petition with over 10,000 signatures, and he's arguing that this will cause, taking the Tour down this road will cause untold environmental damage. The marmots won't hibernate.
They won't eat enough.
They won't eat enough because they'll be so stressed from watching the Tour. We get quite stressed watching the Tour, but not so stressed that we forget to eat.
No, we don't eat more.
He claims that the marmots, and this is only one of the objections that he's raised, but he claims that the marmots will be so stressed that they won't eat enough over subsequent weeks and months, and that they will go into hibernation undernourished and they won't survive the winter. He also claims that the toxins will leak out of the road, which is being resurfaced, and into the environment, and also that the race is going to be breaking the speed limit. And he actually proposes that the race turns left. It's due to turn right at the top of Alpe d'Huez. He proposes that it turns left just after the village of Huez, and there is another loop that is actually feasible, and you would cut off 2 kilometres at the end of Alpe d'Huez on the first time round. But ASO are not returning my calls on this, so I think something might be going on.
I believe Eno was involved in giving it the green light, was he? This descent, was he not?
Yeah, so they first became aware of the possibility of taking the Tour down this road in 2010 at the Dauphiné. So the Dauphiné went up Alpe d'Huez that year, the first time it had ever gone up. And then the night of the stage, Hino and Prudhomme went with the local mayor down the road, and it was, you know, it's a farm track, and they call it the Route Pastorale. It's, you know, it's a farm track. And they got out the car, and sort of everyone looked at Hino, you know, Bernard, what do you reckon? And he sort of kicked a few pebbles into the gutter and thought about it for a few seconds, and then turned to them and said, well, ça passe? Yeah, we can go, we can do it. And then Prudhomme, one of Prudhomme's colleagues actually wanted to take the race down that road in 2011, the famous very short stage to Alpe d'Huez. Thierry Gouvenou, who as of next year will become the route planner, wanted to do a lap then and go twice up Alpe d'Huez, but Prudhomme said no, we'll do it in 2013. So we'll see. I suspect something is going on that, you know, I'm not sure that the marmots and their hibernation will actually sway the vote either way. But
I don't want to give the impression that I don't care deeply about the marmots, because I do. But it would be a shame if you know, all the hype about the going over Alpe d'Huez twice, and that back road is incredibly narrow.
Yeah.
It's a real challenge. I mean, I've been down it on a bike when the Tour's been in town, just because it's the easiest way to get down to the valley without going on the race route. And it's, you know, even for somebody, you know, that's not a professional cyclist, it's an incredible tight, you know, it's just so narrow. There's nowhere to run off either. It's not a...
No, and there'll be 40, 50 riders together at that point, because, you know, you get to the top of that the Alp, and then you turn right, and there's a a long plateau road for I think about 10 kilometres before you actually start the descent. So there's going to be a big regrouping
Could
there.
be a big group, yeah.
But the thing is, you know, two climbs of Alpe d'Huez. I mean, it is such a crowd pleaser. If you were, you know, if you were given the chance to design the perfect tour route, the real grandstand, it's a stage that you would paper say.
Yeah,
it's a no-brainer. Let's do it.
But yeah, I mean, there is this alternative. I mean, joking aside, that has been proposed of turning left, and it wouldn't really change that much. I mean, I think it's one of the perils now that, as we saw in the Giro, the race organisers are coming under more and more pressure to come up with new things and gimmicks, and higher climbs, narrower climbs, more dangerous descents, and really, it's a very similar situation to the Monte Crostis in the Giro a couple of years ago. The time to sort this out is not now. It's not June. The riders should have a representative whenever there is any kind of course that may be dangerous, may be unsuitable. They should send someone to ride it a year before, or months. Sorry, not a year before, but months and months in advance, and then the decision should be made now. And then.
The final sort of climb of the tour we've got personal experience of, just above Annecy.
Yes, we have.
Daniel, we've ridden up there, haven't we?
Yeah.
Did you do it
a couple of years
did you do
ago.
it on folding bikes?
No, we did it on
No, we did
proper
proper
bikes.
bikes.
Doesn't hold many good memories for you, that does it,
Myself,
Rich?
Daniel and Ellis Bacon, we powered up there straight from breakfast. It has to be said. There was
Some of us faster than others.
we
didn't
didn't
Rich?
realise how big a climb it was. It's quite a tough climb.
Skillfully skirting the issue.
Yeah,
of-
it was fair to say that we were scattered asunder on the way up there, and we didn't reach the top as a.
We weren't taking it seriously, were we, Rich?
Nah, we were just. I was warming up, to be honest.
This is the one that was on the route in '98, isn't it? That they weren't. They basically rode.
Yes.
Just rode over in protest because
Yes.
it was on
Oh, it
the
is,
stage that where they'd had all the police raids.
Nice segue. 15th anniversary of Festina
was
this
that-
year, and I'm sure we've not spoken really about doping much, but again, that's one of the topics that will no doubt surface a lot during this tour.
Was that the day when Manolo Saez said, "I've stuck my finger up the Tour de France's beep"?
Bottom.
Yeah.
Just to finish, what are you sort of most looking forward to at the tour this year? Doping scandals or?
No. I think one of the things that occurred to me is that it looks like we know how the tour is going to pan out. Sky are very strong. Froome is incredibly strong. Contador's challenge maybe isn't as. We can't rely on it as much as we might have been able to in recent years. It's so easy a week before the tour to assume you know what is going to happen. But the beauty about the tour is that even in a year like last year when the race for the yellow jersey was extremely controlled, there were still moments that were live long in the memory. Thibaut Pinot's stage win and Marc Madio leaning out of the car window, slapping on the car door, yelling encouragement. The tour throws up so many sort of great moments and so much drama and humour and pathos that
Bring it on.
Bring it on. But
So
I'm
many
looking forward
great
to
dinners as well.
So many great dinners. That's definitely what I'm looking forward to. No danger of us dying going into hibernation this winter, I don't think. Not with all the cassoulet in the south of France. Some good cassoulet country this year.
yeah, and great seafood up in on the northern coast
Wonderful.
as well.
Well, we're going to be podcasting our way around France and probably do a couple over dinner one night, I would think, when time constraints
Cassoulet
prevent us.
special one night.
But the three of us are going to be doing it most nights. I think I'll be kicking it off with Daniel in Corsica. Lionel is otherwise engaged that opening weekend. Glastonbury, I believe.
I'm at Glastonbury,
Lionel,
yeah.
Podding from Glastonbury. So we'll be reporting sort of on a daily basis on humansinvent.com, and we're going to have some special guests as well over the course of the tour. Some exciting mystery guests lined up. So hope you'll listen in. The podcast should be available around about 7 a.m. every morning after the previous stage. So hope you'll join us. Daniel, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.
Lionel, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. See you in Nice.